Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along to today's meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. If we can go straight on to the agenda, which is item number 1, the evacuation procedure. We've not been warned of any practice alarms or anything, so if the alarms go off, we'll treat it for real. And if we can evacuate this room from the doors either side, down the stairs and out the front door, meet across the road by the Yorkshire Bank. It's also a good time to remind people to put their phones on silent or to switch them off. And I also just need to tell, well, members of the public anyway, that our meetings are now recorded and they're streamed out later, probably tomorrow or the day after, on YouTube. Item number 2 are to receive apologies for absence. I think we've only got one person missing. And there's apologies from him. Okay, thank you. Item 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of November. Are you happy that I sign those? Thank you. And item 4 is to receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary and other interests in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct. None? Okay. And item number 5 are declarations of any contact members may have had on any applications on today's agenda. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you. In regard to item 2, 24 Princess Street, I've been contacted by residents.
Which then takes us on to item number 6. Those applications where members of the public have indicated a wish to speak. If I can just run through that process, what will happen is the officer excuse me, the officer will present the report. Following on from that, I'll call those people that are listed on the sheet. The Constitution allows for 3 minutes for you to be able to address the committee. When that 3 minutes is up, the egg timer will go off and I'll stop you at that point if you haven't already finished. That's just so we're fair to everybody that's listed to speak. Following on from that, members may want to seek any points of clarification only from what you've said in your presentation. And then again, following on from that, if officers have got any other response to that, they'll do so. And then when something is moved to allow debate to take place, the committee will debate the matter and hopefully reach a decision today. Vast majority of times we do make a decision on the day, but sometimes it may be deferred for site visits or for further information, but normally on the day we make the decision. Okay, so that then takes us on to item number 1, the land to the rear of 89 to 169 Tunnel Road. Darren, you're doing both of them, I believe. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is to seek approval for the matters which were reserved under the previous outline permission for 14 dwellings on land to the rear of 147 Tunnel Road, which was approved on appeal in January earlier this year. These remaining reserved matters are appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. The site is accessed off Tunnel Road, Nuneaton, where the existing property at 147 Tunnel Road is proposed to be demolished to allow access to the site beyond. Vehicular access to the site is proposed via Tunnel Road in between two properties, 155 and 145 Tunnel Road. The key issues on this reserve matters application are highway safety and parking, landscaping, residential and visual amenity, and any other matters. In regard to highway safety, the access to the site was a matter considered on the outline application. All that remains is for the council to assess the internal layout of the scheme in regard to highway safety. The Highways Authority are content with the scheme, and officers consider that the internal layout will not create any significant harm to highway safety. Landscaping will take the form of soft landscaping to the main street scenes and the open space immediately to the north of the site, which contains the water attenuation basin. Overall, the Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council's Parks and Countryside team have not raised any objection to the scheme in regard to landscaping and are content with the details, and as such, this reserve matter is considered acceptable. The design of the proposed properties is fairly traditional, with gabled roofs, chimneys on some properties, tiles, brick, and render finishing, soldier courses over windows, and stone sills below them. The development is large enough to create its own character, and the large detached dwellings proposed here will be seen as part of its own development. The materials and style will not contrast too greatly with the rest of Tunnel Road, but the site does create its own character, so cohesion is not a concern here. The appearance of the scheme is therefore considered to be acceptable. In regard to the layout reserve matter, the distance standards are met across the site. The curved entrance road leads into the site, with the houses on the northern side of the access road following the curve of the road round. The road terminates in what is effectively a small turning head at the top of the road. In regard to scale, the properties are relatively large detached houses, but the tallest house is only 8.3 metres, so this would not be considered overly tall or incongruous. The character of the new development will be typified by these larger detached houses, and as such, the scale is considered to be appropriate. Some other issues raised by objectors, such as flood risk. However, this is a matter which was considered acceptable at the outline phase by an inspector, and as such, the reserve matters considered here are not considered to significantly impact on flood risk. Overall, the proposed reserve matters are considered to be acceptable, and the application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions laid out on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Darren. Mr. Randall. Okay, thank you. On that point, if you wanted to contact me afterwards, I'll find out the reasons why you weren't contacted. There's normally a process where people are contacted if they've indicated they want to make any points. Are there any points of excuse me? Any points of clarification? No. In that case, to enable debate to take place, can I move the recommendation as printed, which is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions printed on the agenda? Is that seconded? Any member? Councillor Longdon.
The way this is developed, but it's always the problem when we have these outline planning permissions. We're always in this cleft stick because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But we saw and we listened to the people that know, mainly the residents up there, and the inspectors overturned us. So we're now in this cleft stick of trying to find, if we possibly could, substantial grounds for rejection of this appeal, rejection of this application, and I can't find any. We could obviously make the decision to refuse, but then we went to appeal again, we'd lose badly, and that means that we're going to get stung with costs again, all the council taxpayers are going to get stung with costs again. So I'm not very happy with the whole thing, the way the process is developed, and it's just another example of the developers having the upper hand in just about everything that goes on in the planning world, and that doesn't sit too well with me because it's normally to the detriment of local people. There is one thing on the drawing that threw me, and that was a numbering of the premises, of the properties. It goes on the left-hand side, it goes 1 to 5, and then it jumps to 8 and goes round the corner 7, 6. And you come across the road, it's 9, 10, 11, 12. Why it doesn't go in sequence, I really don't know. Why 6 doesn't follow 5. It's going to be a nightmare if it gets built for the postman or woman. So, but that's not grounds for rejection. So, whilst I'm not happy, we're in this situation. I'm not of our making, but we're now stymied, to be honest, with the way that the law stands.
Councillor Wilson.
Before I comment, Mr. Randall mentioned about changing the layout of the proposed application so that the bungalows were closer to the existing dwellings as opposed to having the two-storey houses that way. Is that something which we could use as a reason for refusal on the grounds of layout? Because the issue about access, we've all argued that, and I remember arguing it when this site's been up before. We've lost that argument, but this is specifically on appearance, landscape, layout and scale. Is that a justifiable reason about trying to protect the existing residents and asking Mr. Cartwright and co to go back and look at changing the layout of the houses?
Residential amenity is a consideration of the planning application. So we have considered how it affects neighbours, both internally and externally with the existing properties. However, it does meet with the distance standards within the design guide. So although we could obviously request that, I don't think we could sustain a reason for refusal on those grounds.
But we can't, because I actually think Mr. Randall has a valid point. We might have lost one of the particular battles, but I think it would have been helpful if we could have tried to assist the residents in that regard, because I still have concerns about the access, because I know on one of the good days you can't get a fag packet between the cars bumper to bumper up that road. And the only thing we have left is layout and scale. But if the officers are telling me that we can't defend it on that basis, then the best I can do is abstain, because I can't vote for this proposal, Chair. I don't agree with it, but I've got nothing that I can substantiate, apparently, a refusal on. So I won't support it, but I'm stuck with what to vote against on that basis, Chair.
Alfred.
Here's another question for officers. Looking at the plan, there seems to be quite a lot of unused land behind properties 4 to 6, between that and the boundary of the site. I was just wondering whether there's any reason for the unused land being there and not behind the existing properties, or being part of the gardens of numbers 14 or 9 to 14. I just wonder why the road seems to veer round towards the existing properties and not veer around to the western boundary of the site. Thank you, Chair.
I believe that the layout was in this orientation and to use this open space for a couple of reasons. I think one is that the open space was necessary for the floodwater attenuation pond, but I think also a lot of the field boundaries are being maintained, which was a desire of the inspector. The original application that came in, I think it was 2013, was for 153 dwellings, I believe. And when that was refused, I think the inspector mentioned retaining the original field boundaries, because they obviously have value in themselves. So a lot of those, they are being retained with this scheme. I think that's true. If they're within if they're within a property boundary, obviously anybody's got the right to remove a hedge within their garden. So I think that's why it's been designed in that way.
I just follow up. See the attenuation there in the sort of bit that sticks out at the top. So I'm talking about the land behind numbers 4, 5 and 6, basically. And I'm assuming the line, which is the boundary of the site, is the hedgerow, and that between the bottom of the back gardens and the hedgerow, there's quite a large space. I was just wondering what the reasoning is for that. Is that covered by your explanation or not?
As far as I'm aware, it is to do with retention of the hedgerow boundaries. They do need to retain them, but also the setback of the built development adjacent to that hedge boundary softens the impact of the development in relation to the important landscape features which are on the adjacent land. So that, I think, is another reason why they've developed it and designed it that particular way.
I accept those justifications. What it seems to be is, in this particular instance, the environmental aspects of the site are taking precedence over perhaps the interests of the existing residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I just had one question for the officers. It looks like some archaeological work has taken place in September this year. What actions have to be followed up in the planning conditions following that?
That was submitted and carried out, that was all done as part of the previous planning application. The Warwickshire Museum and Field Services have not commented on this particular planning application because they are principally dealing with the previous application. So in terms of whether there's any follow-up, that's not related to what we're actually considering now. That would be on a previous application. We can find that information out and come back to you if you wish.
Yes, because I think that big. Just going to close by saying I agree with previous comments made that, I don't like being asked the same question over and over again when my opinion hasn't changed. I just can't support this since I've had another read through this. Nothing's changed enough in my liking from the last time I had to vote on this, so I see no course but to abstain since there's not anything that will stick that we could refuse it on.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Well, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I've got to agree with my time reading through the application, and I can't find sufficient reasons for turning it down. But I've got a couple of bits of clarification for the officer. I was a bit amused when I saw the drawing headed refuse vehicle tracking. I presume this is a legal requirement then, is it, for refuse vehicles to have access? I say that with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek because I noticed that the Warwickshire Fire and Rescue have consulted and okayed it. So presumably the turning area and the dimensions of this access road are within the limits. I say that because the drawing's obviously a scale drawing, but I think the refuse truck is pretty big. I just wanted to make sure that there'd be enough width in that access road for vehicles to pass each other.
It's been to the County Council, the Highways Authority are based there, obviously. They've got no objection to it. They would assess the manoeuvring space within the road for larger vehicles, such as refuse trucks. So, yeah, I'm obviously not a highways engineer, but I've been advised by my highways engineers that it does meet with those standards.
Yeah, well, I can confirm and the turning circle to be acceptable for a fire appliance to get down there and get back out again. The other point that I'd like to raise is I'm always amused when I want to see all the trees marked on these drawings. Have we got the right to make sure these trees stay where they are? I count there's about 30 of them on the site, but it seems to me quite often when a planning application is approved, one of the first things that happens is trees are felled. Is that the case, or am I wrong in that assumption? It mentions the existing hedgerows and the trees, but I just want to make sure if there is 30 trees on the site that we keep as many of them as possible, please.
Form part of the approval, so obviously it's a landscaping plan. Landscaping is being approved, and obviously the trees and all that form part of the reserve matter that's being approved. It's not a tree preservation order in that regard, but yeah, the development has to be carried out in accordance with these plans.
It'll be made before, but just briefly, obviously, we were all against development on that site when it come before, went to the inspector, and here we are. And we now then have to take that as it happened. It was an outline application, as has been said before. We've got a problem a lot of the time when we have the outline and then the detail comes. And I was very interested in some of the questions that have been asked, particularly about the land at the back and protecting this and protecting that, the hedge and whatever. And of course, we're protecting the archaeological sort of stuff and archaeological stuff there. But it just, as has been said by somebody before, it's as if that's been looked at and that has a higher value than people. And that does sort of worry me. Everything does seem to have been pushed down there, and that's where it is. I've got one question. Some members have already stated that they will be abstaining because, they couldn't vote for it because they were against it in the first place. It's probably a question for the solicitor. What happens if we all abstain?
I don't know. I'm not the legal person. But if everybody abstained, then clearly there's no determination on the planning application. At some point, it would have to be determined.
Come back then.
I think clearly, I or anybody else can't tell somebody how they're going to vote. But I totally agree with you on the comments, and you probably stole my thunder because I was just about to say it, is the planning committee is one of a few, probably just 2 committees now, where actually you can make decisions as a member. And I always advise people, if they're thinking of coming on planning committee, don't do it if you're just joining it to get any political nous out of it, because it's not about that. There's always winners and there's losers, and we need to make decisions. Having said that, people are entitled to vote for, against or abstain. But when you're voting for an application, or if you're voting against an application, you have to supply proper planning reasons for doing so. And I guess that's the same if you're going to abstain on something. Anyway, is there any other member that's not already spoken? If not, then it's been moved and seconded to grant planning permission subject to the conditions printed on this agenda. All those in favour of that? And against? And abstentions? The recommendation is approved. Okay, if we can move on to item number 2, please, 24 Princes Avenue, Nuneaton.
This application is for a proposed 2-storey extension to the rear of the former car showroom at 24A Princess Street. Princess Avenue, apologies, and the creation of 2 flats at first floor and the use of the ground floor as an A1 retail pharmacy. The plans also show the extensions which were approved under the previous permission, so these have been included for their attention, although they do already have permission. The site is on the corner of Princess Street and Bracebridge Street in Nuneaton and has currently been vacant for a number of years, but was most recently used as a small car sales unit some years ago. The key issues to consider in this development are the principle of residential development, the appropriateness of the change of use to a pharmacy, the sequential approach, impact on residential amenity, impact on visual amenity, and impact on highway safety. In regard to the principle of the development, the need for housing is well documented within the borough. The proposed residential units will add a small amount of residential use within the existing urban area and would not contrast with the surrounding uses since there are many residential properties in the area. The change of use to the pharmacy at ground floor is required by the applicant to relocate and expand their existing business, which is a pharmacy on Edward Street, by utilising these larger premises here at 24A. Princess Avenue. The proposed pharmacy falls within an A1 use class, which is classed as a main town centre use in national guidance, but this is an out-of-centre location. It is considered by the applicant that this type of use, the pharmacy, will primarily serve a small local population, with the most referrals coming from the nearby Old Mill surgery. It is considered by officers that this is likely to be the case, and that pharmacies do tend to serve the local communities in which they're based, with a main surgery near them. Pharmacies, all located within town centres, would do little to help communities to access healthcare. So it is accepted that some uses such as this do have a place in out-of-town centre locations to benefit those living away from towns or district centres. In regard to residential amenities, some objectors have raised concerns over antisocial behaviour. Warwickshire Police have stated that there is no observable correlation between drug users and pharmacy burglaries. It is considered that although an A1 retail use, like this pharmacy, can sometimes bring disturbance with it, this is an unknown quantity, and there are no grounds to refuse a pharmacy on antisocial behaviour grounds. Environmental Health here at Nuneaton Bedworth Borough Council have raised a concern over noise arriving from the pharmacy use, so a condition is recommended which restricts the hours of the use, and it is subsequently considered to mitigate any significant harm from noise. The physical extensions all meet with the distance standards adopted by the Council. The front elevation will not alter too much as a result of this permission. A shop front will be added to part of the elevation, which will make the A1 pharmacy use a display area and use the premises as a normal shop. In the elevation facing onto Bracebridge Street, there is a part of a two-storey extension visible within the street scene. However, this will be set back fairly far from Bracebridge Street. These changes to the elevations are considered to be acceptable. The two-storey extension proposed is effectively to the rear. However, there will be fleeting glimpses of this through the narrow frontage facing onto Bracebridge Street. There are other extensions shown on the plans. However, these have all got permission under a previous application and all meet with adopted guidance. The Highways Authority have no objection to the scheme, and it is considered that any potential harm to highway safety is not so significant so as to warrant refusal. The proposal is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions laid out on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
There's two people already here speaking as objectors. I was informed that I will speak just to the report that's laid out in front of us. So I'm going to reflect on the planning application at the request of residents and suggest that if minded, the committee should take a site visit. The wording of any application creates a picture which may not be entirely reflective. At the beginning of the report, it states the change of use from a car showroom to a pharmacist. Perhaps that should read a previous small-scale car showroom which has been boarded up for approximately 12 years to a pharmacist which could be open from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday and 10 p.m. to 6 p.m. Sundays. The report gives the impression that this car showroom is something actual when in fact it is being a deserted building. The use of the word dishevelled is also very subjective. The application is light on the fact that this is a residential area. The last of the small-scale factories, light engineering and car showroom, long since gone and replaced with housing. The whole report states the existing use is for a car showroom and an established commercial use has been set. This may not actually be correct, as the class order of sui generis is a class that does not fall within any other classes. As to my mind, it could be a class order that signifies a lack of use or even abandoned. The report is also subjective in the fact that the applicant has failed to provide a sequential test, as in their words, there is little merit in undertaking one. However, the report states where an application fails to satisfy the test, it should be refused. Whilst the pharmacy uses the relationship with the Old Mill Doctor's surgery to reinforce the requirement to move, the figures indicate very little difference in percentage terms with the three other main pharmacies. And in reference to the test, it would appear that 60% of Old Mill Surgery's prescriptions are indeed dispensed outside the area concerned, with 40% over the four pharmacies listed. Maybe the 60% are dispensed in the town centre. There is no indication in the report that the applicant has considered other sites, although we have this application before us. The report does not indicate, in reference to the lack of a sequential test report, how close the town centre is from the current site, and therefore the panel might be led to presume it is a bus ride or a long walk, which is neither the case. In reference to the impact on residential amenity, it is subjective whether the pharmacy will or not increase antisocial behaviour. It is not subjective It is not subjective that the particular area has had issues with antisocial behaviour and dispersal orders on the avenue.
Okay. Any points of clarification? No? Mr. Idris Sheikh.
Okay, I would like to object on the basis that the current proposal, we as residents believe, will have a significant and adverse effect on the quality of life and mental well-being, really, of residents. Primarily, it's already been echoed previously, but noise and traffic pollution, the disturbance due to footfall, the loss of privacy. I mean, there's a 5-bedroom property together with 2 additional flats on their own will create their own significant parking demand. To add a chemist into the mix will mean further loss of on-road parking. Parking is already an issue on the street, as most of the properties don't have any off-road parking. Residents have real concerns that the loss of on-road car parking space, which is a valuable residential benefit, will be lost. Also have real concerns around the light pollution and impact on neighbouring properties based on the current opening hours of the Pharmacy Republic, which are Monday to Friday 9 till 11 p.m, Saturday and Sunday 9 till midnight. We've got no objection. I mean, there's references made to previous applications, which we've got no objections to those which were sympathetic with the neighbourhood and proposed an entirely and solely residential properties. We urge the panel to consider the Human Rights Act, in particular Protocol 1, Article 1, which states that a person has a right to peaceful enjoyment and possessions, which include home and land. I'd urge the panel to listen to the overwhelming viewpoint of the residents and reject the application. Thank you very much.
Okay. No, if I could ask Safia Sheikh. Thank you.
I'd also like to object. I think that as the service gets underway, the pharmacy could choose to offer its services to drug-dependent patients. And, we've already had a massive problem within the area with cannabis use and congregation around, the houses. And I feel that if this is, opened up to these users, we've got a park that's nearby, that's used by all the residents, all the children as well. And I don't think it's very safe for maybe then them to congregate around these areas also. Thank you.
Are there any points of clarification? Try again. Okay, in that case, to enable debate to take place, can I move the recommendation, which is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions printed? Is that seconded? Okay, any member? Councillor Pomfret.
About this, I need to get clear in my mind what is already been approved and what is subject to the present application. And looking at the plans on page 31, I find it difficult to understand which are the existing permissions and what is actually being asked for now. Thank you.
On the plan above me, all that's being applied for now in terms of extensions is the small grey shaded box that towards the rear of the site. That's the only extension that's being applied for here that's new. Okay.
Doesn't include any reconfiguration of building frontages and things like that.
Yeah, that's the shop fronts to be included.
So there's the area with the red, the things at the bottom. They're to the rear of the building, are they? Right. So, looking at those, the two plans at the bottom are both rear views. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So,
Right.
Comparison. So you can just see again, those two bits essentially, the shop front and the front end and the rear.
Right. So, you've got the red circle there. So, I'm getting confused here. The bits to the extreme left are the one that's on the left. That's not shown on the second plan. Is that correct? Looking at the plan on the left, the bit
So the left is what has permission. The right is what's been applied for. The two bits of red circles are not being applied for.
right. On the plan on the left at the bottom, there seems to be a door and a window. I'm just trying to clarify, exactly what's going on here. There's the bit there which has got the additional roof on it. I can see that to the left of the quadruple door. Right. But this is all behind the building and not visible from the road. Is that correct?
So it's all, that's Prince's Avenue, where my pointer is. That's Bracebridge Street, obviously. So it's just towards that rear part of the site. Shop front's obviously on a frontage, and the extensions to the rear.
The question I've got the existing permissions. We know what they were going to look like. It would seem that this application, if approved and we get a shop there as well, is going to have impacts on how the thing looks from the street, which aren't subject to an application. But
let me just find it again. So that's the shop front that's going to be in the street scene. Okie doke, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to make sure we're absolutely clear on this shop front thing, yeah? But the shop front is on the existing building line of the building. It's not projecting out. It's not an extension. It's the building line as it is now, but a shop front installed. Okay, right. I hope that helps. Sorry, I just saw somebody indicate then. Councillor Longdon.
Problem with Princess Street and Princess Avenue. This application is for Princess Avenue, yet it says on that plan Princess Street. And they are very different, both sides of Henry Street. So can we, I mean, these are going to be legal documents at the end of the day, I assume, so can we have it right that it's actually Princess Avenue and not Princess Street? That's the first thing. And I think years ago I might have gone up there and tried to buy a car when it was a car showrooms. And this does represent some change, albeit possibly not, because I remember, I'm sure it had a big window in it, and this plan seems to be taking up where that window was, or there's 4 windows going. I can't make my mind up because they're quite long things, but nothing else seems to change on the building. Is that a correct assumption? Because I'm coming round to the way of thinking that we might need a site visit on this to actually have a look at it and see just what the impact's going to be and where things are in relation to each other on the ground.
Councillor Shepherd.
Site visit to look at the impact on the street scene, on particular on 19 Princess Street, in regard to the distance standards that haven't been met in our report, and also because of the substantial approach that the developer hasn't taken. Thank you.
Right, before I move on to our other two speakers, it makes it a bit awkward now, really. It's been moved and seconded a site visit to assess the distance standards that allegedly have not been met and the lack of the sequential approach by the applicants. Yeah? And the impact on 19 Princes Street. Well, right, well, okay. Whether it's street or avenue, I've got one person saying this is wrong, and I've got somebody else saying that's wrong. So I'm going by what's printed on the agenda, Princes Avenue, and I assume that that would be how it's described by the applicant when they make the application. Right, okay. I'm going to take any comments now in regards to, well, it's the same sort of thing, but about the site visit thing. It's been moved and seconded, but I've still got two speakers anyway, Councillor Bonner and Councillor Copeland, then I'll take the vote on the site visit.
You all know my sense of humour. I'd like to make a proposal that more of my colleagues, obviously it doesn't apply to everybody, get around town on their feet and perhaps use bicycles instead of using the main roads. I go up Princess Avenue, Princess Street, probably 4 or 5 times a year because it's the best way to get to Greenmoor Road from where I live. I'm all in favour of these sort of applications because I feel I'm fairly new to the planning committee still after 2 years, in my second year, but the sequential approach, I read that with interest today because I'm not quite sure, as I understand about town centres, why they're such a good idea. Again, I'm going to use a personal experience. Where I live, it's about a 2 or 3 minute walk to my nearest pharmacist. I was up there this afternoon. Well, it only took me 60 seconds because I went on my bike. I'd got to go past it anyway. This particular pharmacist that's moving, I do remember using it one, it was either Christmas Day or Boxing Day because it was the only one open in town. So again, they're good to have local amenities and not just pharmacists. So I'm quite pleased that I live near a corner shop and all sorts of things that are useful. So I don't agree with sequential approach. I don't agree with town centres and that approach. I think it's good to have local facilities within a walking distance or within a 2 or 3 minute cycling distance because it's good for the health of the community. It's good for us to walk and cycle. It's not good for us to drive from Princess Street or Princess Avenue to the town centre or take a bus ride to pick up a prescription. So I'm actually in favour of this application, and I think I know the situation well enough not to need a site visit. Thank you very much.
Councillor Copeland, then. Sorry?
I'm happy, Chair.
In which case, I'm going to test the water in regards to the site visit. It's been moved and seconded that we make a site visit to look at, in regards to our distance standards, the sequential approach and the impact on 19 Princes Avenue. All those in favour of that? And against? No abstentions. Okay, in which case we'll make a site visit prior to our next meeting, which is about a fortnight away, I believe.
It's the 12th of December.
12th of December, okay.